Why did she keep missing the target? Every soldier on the line could feel the heat shimmer off the range, the air thick with cordite and sweat. The kind of heat that burned through focus, through patience, through pride. But this was something else. 7 times the target had stayed red. 7 failures, all belonging to the same woman. Specialist Lena stood at lane 4, her uniform clean but her stance wrong, too stiff, too careful, like someone afraid of her own strength. Around her the others moved like machines, weapons snapping into the shoulder, elbows locked, breathing measured and mechanical. She looked human, fragile even. Her rifle didn't sit like an extension of herself. It looked borrowed. "Shooter ready," called the instructor, his voice stripped of interest by repetition. Lena gave a small nod. No fire in her eyes, just that washed-out gray, as if all color had been drained long ago. "Engage." The line erupted in precise rhythm. Controlled chaos. The snap of rounds, the mechanical clatter of charging handles, brass spinning like gold in the sun. From Lena's lane came a single, hesitant shot. Then silence. The recoil rocked her frame. She caught herself awkwardly, earning a low snicker from the corporal in the next lane. On the monitor beside Major, a red light blinked miss. 2 feet low, 1 foot left. Not even close. His jaw tightened. He'd seen it all before: a poor posture, weak fundamentals, no discipline. But this was something uglier, a waste. He prided himself on precision, on control, on turning raw recruits into weapons. Was none of those things. "Cease fire, cease fire." Weapons cleared, bolts locked. The air filled with the clack of metal and the muted shame of failure. Fumbled her magazine release. It clattered to the concrete. Corporal laughed openly now. His boots crunched down the firing line. He stopped behind her, his shadow cutting over her back. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Every soldier knew what that silence meant. "Specialist," his voice was calm, too calm. "Explain to me what you were doing." She turned slowly, her face unreadable. "Trying to qualify, sir." "Trying," he let the word hang. "Specialist, a child could hit that target more consistently than you. This is the 3rd day. 3 days of ammunition, 3 days of wasted time. You are wasting my instructor's effort and mine." A few soldiers shifted uneasily. Most watched. Public failure was entertainment when it wasn't you. "I understand, sir," she said softly. "I will try harder." "No, you won't." He stepped closer. "You're done. Report to administrative barracks. I'll start the paperwork. We forge soldiers here, not whatever you are." His words were final, forged from pride and frustration. He turned away, expecting her to vanish, to fold into silence. But she didn't move. "Sir," she said quietly. He stopped. The tone, steady, not pleading, made him turn. "What is it?" "Permission to attempt the course one more time." He blinked. "A cold bore shot, you're joking." "1 magazine, 10 rounds." Her calm unsettled him. It wasn't defiance. It was patience, stillness, something that belonged to people who didn't care if they failed or died trying. He studied her properly for the first time. Older than most recruits, late 30s maybe. The faint lines at her eyes weren't from laughter. Her hands were steady, veins like pale threads under skin. On the back of her left hand, a small, crescent-shaped scar. It caught the sunlight, delicate and strange. He almost asked about it, then dismissed the thought. "Fine," he growled. "1 magazine. Sergeant Davis, get her a fresh rifle. I don't want her blamming the equipment." Davis handed her the weapon without ceremony. "Don't break this one," he muttered. She took it differently this time. Not clumsy, not afraid. The way someone might take back an old habit. Her fingers found the rifle's balance instinctively. "Range is hot," called dripping sarcasm. "Whenever you're ready, specialist. We're all waiting." She didn't flinch, just closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again, and everything changed. Her movement was fluid, effortless. The rifle rose, cheek to stock, sight aligned. No hesitation. Crack! The monitor blinked green, center mass. Frowned coincidence, luck. Crack. Another green, precisely 1 inch above the first. Crack, 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 3 more in a single breath. A cloverleaf of precision burned into the screen. The murmurs began immediately. Smirk vanished. Davis took a half-step closer to the monitor, eyes wide. His mind stumbled over the data. This wasn't shooting. This was surgery. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Crack headshot. Crack another exact same place. Crack left knee. Crack right knee. The range was silent now, the kind of silence that only follows disbelief. Her last round waited. 5 seconds passed. She wasn't aiming at the silhouette anymore. Followed her gaze downrange. A steel support cable shimmered in the heat, thin as a finger. Ping! The cable snapped. The target collapsed into the dirt. For a long, impossible moment, nobody moved. Then cleared her weapon, perfect form, every movement clean and deliberate. She placed it on the bench and turned to face. Her eyes, those colorless gray eyes, were no longer empty. They were ancient, heavy with things unsaid. He looked down at her hand, that crescent scar. Something tugged at his memory. A briefing years ago in a dark operations room. Classified slides, redacted reports. A rumor whispered between officers, Kestrel. A ghost, a deniable operative. The one who appeared on the ridge when everything went wrong. 20 minutes, dozens of enemies, every shot a single, precise note in a song of death. Not a sniper rifle, an enemy assault rifle. And each rifle they carried after, the stock marked with a small crescent moon. His mouth went dry. She hadn't been failing, she had been fighting herself. Trying to miss, trying to unlearn what her body refused to forget. He whispered her name, but it didn't feel right anymore. She didn't answer. Then the world exploded. The blast came from the far end of the range, a roar that ripped the air apart. The ammunition shed vanished in a bloom of orange fire. The shockwave threw bodies to the ground. Contact, contact, Davis screamed, clutching his bleeding arm. His instincts kicked in. Get to cover, return fire. Gunfire tore through the air, controlled, professional, not insurgent chaos. This was tactical, disciplined, soldiers. He risked a glance over the barrier, figures on the ridge moving with precision, cover fire, suppression, flanking angles. His gut turned to ice. They weren't random attackers. This was an organized hit. And move. Didn't move. Fear rooted him in place. Shouted again. But the corporal only stared at the smoke and gunfire like a child watching a nightmare unfold. He looked back to where had been. She was gone. For a heartbeat, dread filled him. Had she run? Had the legend been nothing more than a story? Then he saw her, moving. While everyone else hugged the ground, she was cutting through the chaos, low, silent, calculating. She wasn't using standard cover points. She was reading the battlefield the way others read a map, tracking shadows, timing reloads, predicting bursts. Her destination, the arms bunker 50 yards of open ground away, a death zone. She paused at the edge of cover, tilted her head, listening, watching. The rhythm of their fire, the space between bursts, the brief heartbeat of silence when they shifted position. And then she moved. Not in a sprint. In a weave, unpredictable, fluid. Bullets chased her, tearing up the ground behind her boots. She rolled behind a burnt-out jeep, then slipped into the smoke trail rising from the burning shed. Could barely track her. She wasn't running, she was disappearing. Then the sound changed. A deep, resonant thump-thump-thump. The kind of sound that cuts through everything. A .50 caliber rifle. On the ridge, one of the attackers jerked back, vanishing in red mist. Another dropped his radio, chest shattered. Then another. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was too steady, too confident. It was her. The battle turned. The assault fractured, precision replaced by panic. They were no longer predators, they were prey. Shouted orders rallying his scattered men. "Get on comms, Davis, suppress the left flank." The soldiers moved again, purpose returning. They weren't winning, not really, but they weren't dying either. Grabbed his binoculars. On the ridge, confusion. The attackers retreating in disarray. He shifted focus to the arms bunker, and there she was. A silhouette in the firing port. Calm, centered, every shot deliberate, every breath controlled. He saw the flash of light on her cheek, the faint mark of shrapnel, the stillness of her body. And for the first time in his career, Major felt something unfamiliar, reverence. He scanned the ridge again, searching for the enemy sniper that had pinned them down earlier. Found him, slumped, unmoving, the scope shattered. Zoomed in. There was a perfect hole through the center of the sniper's optic. She'd shot him through his own scope. His throat tightened. The briefing stories hadn't been exaggerations. If anything, they'd been polite lies. He lowered the binoculars, trembling. Around him, the base burned. His soldiers shouted. But all he could see was that calm figure in the bunker, no longer the fumbling woman who missed her mark. The ghost had woken. And as the last echoes of gunfire faded, he understood one simple, terrifying truth. She hadn't just saved them. She had decided to. Smoke hung low over the range, thick and acrid, rolling through the silence that followed the storm. The ridge was quiet now. No muzzle flashes, no movement, just the faint crackle of burning timber and the soft, hollow sound of metal cooling in the heat. Major stood slowly, brushing dust and grit from his uniform. His ears still rang, the world muffled as if underwater. He looked around, dazed faces, bleeding soldiers, the scattered wreckage of the attack. Was shaking beside a stack of sandbags, eyes wide, the radio still clutched in his hand. Davis knelt nearby, his sleeve soaked in blood, trying to apply his own tourniquet. And then there was her. Lena emerged from the haze like an apparition, the long black barrel of the rifle cradled in her arms. Her uniform was streaked with dust and ash, her hair plastered to her face by sweat. There was a gash along her cheek, a thin trickle of blood cutting through the grime. She walked with steady steps, not triumphant, not hurried, just calm, measured, inevitable. No one spoke as she passed. The air around her was thick with disbelief. Moments ago, she'd been the failure everyone laughed at. Now she was something else entirely, something most of them couldn't name. Stepped forward. He didn't salute, didn't order. He just stared. The looked comically large in her hands, but she carried it as if it were made for her. Her gaze swept the horizon, still scanning for movement, her body unconsciously calculating range, wind, distance, muscle memory at work. "Specialist," said finally, his voice rough. She turned her head slightly. Her expression was unreadable. He stopped. What could he say? "You just saved my men. You just did the impossible." Words felt small against what she'd done. His reply was quiet, almost lost in the crackle of flames. "I followed my training, sir." Her tone was neutral, not proud, just matter of fact, as if she'd simply filled out a form correctly this time. Looked at her, really looked at her. The line of her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands now that the adrenaline was fatting, the way her eyes flickered, not with pride but with fatigue. This wasn't victory for her. This was a relapse. He could feel the truth settling in his gut like lead. She hadn't wanted to fire that rifle again. She hadn't wanted to remember who she was. "Medics," he barked suddenly, his voice regaining command authority. "Check the wounded, secure the perimeter, move." The spell broke. Soldiers scrambled into motion, grateful for orders, for normalcy. But their glances kept darting back toward her, the woman who had done what none of them could. She lowered the slowly, setting it on the ground. The weapon still smoked faintly from the barrel. She brushed her left hand against her thigh, and eyes caught that crescent-shaped scar again, shining faintly beneath a film of sweat and dust. It wasn't just a mark, it was a signature. The rumors whispered years ago came back in fragments. A Black Ops team trapped on foreign soil. A woman who appeared like a shadow dismantled an army with a rifle she'd never seen before. They called her Kestrel, the bird that hunts in silence, strikes with speed, and vanishes before the dust settles. He remembered the old colonel's voice from that classified briefing. If the Kestrel is ever seen again, it won't be under command. It'll be under necessity. That's what makes her dangerous. Now she stood right in front of him, not a ghost, but flesh and blood, breathing, exhausted, trying to disappear again. The next hour passed in fragments. Fire suppression, casualty checks, communications scrambled and re-established. Reports of 5 attackers dead, 2 captured, several unknowns retreating into the hills. They were professionals, ex-military by the look of their equipment. No insignia, no identification. Mercenaries, maybe. Or worse, a message from someone who knew what this base was training. By dusk, the chaos had given way to a fragile order. Wounded were evacuated. Ammunition accounted for. The base stood, bruised but alive. Found again by the sandbag wall. She was kneeling beside a young private, helping a medic splint a shattered leg. Her hands, the same hands that had just wielded death with surgical precision, now moved with gentleness. She tied the bandage firmly, then gave the soldier a faint nod, as if reassuring him he'd done nothing wrong by surviving. Watched her quietly. There was no triumph in her face, no satisfaction, just that same still calm. The calm of someone who'd been through this too many times to celebrate it anymore. When she stood, he approached. She noticed him immediately but didn't salute. "You saved this base," he said simply. She shook her head. "No, sir, the base saved itself. I just reacted." "That's not what I saw." His tone softened. "You knew exactly what to do." She hesitated. Her eyes drifted past him, toward the smoking ridge line. "Sometimes knowing what to do isn't a blessing, sir." The silence that followed carried more weight than any medal. Exhaled slowly. He wanted to ask about the scar, the marksmanship, the stories, but something in her stillness stopped him. He realized she wasn't hiding what she was protecting it, from the world and maybe from herself. "Command will want a report," he said finally. "They'll ask what happened here." "Then tell them the truth," she replied quietly. "What truth is that?" "That your range came under attack, that your soldiers fought back." That specialist finally passed her weapons qualification. Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. There was weariness there, the kind that doesn't come from fatigue but from years of carrying ghosts. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll sign the paperwork myself." For a moment, a flicker of something passed through her expression, not relief, not gratitude, but a quiet acceptance. As the last light faded over the desert hills, the range began to empty. Soldiers moved like shadows, cleaning weapons, clearing debris, whispering fragments of disbelief. "Did you see her?" One shot through the scope. "She's not human, man." Ignored them. She walked alone to the far bench where her rifle lay disassembled. Piece by piece, she began cleaning it, not as a ritual but as penance. Each motion deliberate, mechanical, cleansing. Lingered in the distance, watching her from behind a wall of dusk. The fire's reflection flickered across her face. He thought of what she'd said earlier. Sometimes knowing what to do isn't a blessing. He understood that now. For soldiers like her, instinct wasn't skill. It was a curse that never turned off. Hours passed. The wounded were stabilized. The dead were counted. The stars began to burn through the haze, and still she sat there, wiping the carbon from her weapon, her hands steady, her expression hollow. When finally approached, she didn't look up. "You should rest, specialist," he said. "So should you, sir." He almost smiled. "You're not going to, are you?" "No, sir." He crouched beside her. "You know what command's going to ask me. Who were they, why they hit a training base, how we held. They're going to want details." You'll tell them what they need to hear, she said softly, not what they wouldn't believe. He studied her profile, lit by the faint glow of a lantern. You've done this before. She paused in her cleaning. Done what? Disappear. A faint shadow crossed her face. It's easier than being found. He didn't press. There were lines you didn't cross with people like her, not because of protocol, but because some answers weren't meant for you. He stood slowly, brushing his knees. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you don't have to disappear here. She didn't look up. I already have, sir. He watched her for a long moment, the faint sound of the cleaning brush whispering through the rifle's chamber. Then he turned and walked away. The night deepened, generators hummed. The medevac choppers came and went, their rotor wash stirring up dust and ash. Life, in its stubborn military way, began to return to routine. But nothing about this night was routine. In the command tent, stood over his report. He wrote the words carefully, each one a small betrayal wrapped in duty. Base came under coordinated assault, casualties sustained, attack repelled by unit response. Specialist L qualified expert on M4 rifle, outstanding performance noted. He stared at the last line, outstanding performance. It sounded ridiculous, like writing mild turbulence after a plane crash. He deleted the next sentence 3 times before finally writing it. Further review recommended. It was the safest lie he could tell. When he stepped outside, dawn was creeping across the horizon. The air was cooler, the wind sharp. He found her again, sitting alone behind the motor pool, knees drawn up, her rifle resting across them. A different weapon this time, sleeker, custom-built, something she shouldn't even have on base. She was cleaning it slowly, reverently, as the first light of morning brushed her face. The sun caught the scar on her hand. That small crescent shimmered gold, like a forgotten insignia. She paused, staring at it. Then softly, so quietly he almost didn't hear, she whispered, "It's never over, is it?" He didn't answer. He knew she wasn't talking to him. He watched her in silence for a long time, the gentle rhythm of the cloth against steel, the way she breathed in time with it, steady, deliberate. The ghost that had saved them all, now trying to make peace with the weapon that wouldn't let her rest. Turned away, letting her be. Some rituals were not for outsiders to witness. Behind him, the base stirred with the sounds of rebuilding hammers, shouted orders, engines turning over, life moving on. But every man and woman who had seen her shoot that day would carry the same quiet truth. They hadn't just watched a soldier fire a rifle. They had witnessed something that didn't belong to training manuals or standard procedures. They'd watched restraint break. They'd watched instinct take over. They watched a ghost return to life. And somewhere deep down, every one of them knew she hadn't come back for glory. She'd come back because someone forced her hand. Why did command arrive so fast? The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the distant whine of rotors cut through the morning air. Dust rose from the landing pad as 2 transport helicopters settled in, their paint gleaming under the harsh desert light. Major watched from the edge of the range, his uniform newly pressed, though his eyes carried the exhaustion of a sleepless night. The medevac crews had already come and gone hours ago. This was different. From the first helicopter stepped a cluster of officers, too polished, too quiet. Not the kind that came to help, the kind that came to clean up. Colonel Rains led them, a lean man with the posture of someone who believed rank made him untouchable. Behind him came 2 others, a woman in intelligence gray and a tall man in civilian clothes wearing aviator sunglasses. No one spoke as they walked. They didn't have to. Their silence was its own warning. Met them halfway, saluted crisply, "Colonel." Rains returned it lazily. "Major, eventful morning, I hear." "Yes, sir. Base was attacked at 0600. Coordinated assault, unknown assailants. We repelled the attack, casualties minimal. Raines's eyes scanned the smoking ridge, the scorched earth, the scattered debris. Minimal. His tone was flat, almost amused. Given the firepower expended, I'd call that remarkable. He gestured to the intelligence officer. This is Major from Analysis Division. She'll be conducting an incident assessment. The woman nodded curtly, her expression unreadable. The man in sunglasses said nothing at all, but his gaze swept the field like a radar, methodical, predatory. Had seen his kind before. He wasn't from command. He was from somewhere deeper, the kind of place that didn't have insignias or chains of command. "Understood, sir," said. "Good," Raines replied. "Then let's begin." They walked the length of the range together. Every step was a reminder of what had happened. The scorch marks where the ammo shed had been, the impact craters dotting the sand, the faint copper smell of blood that no amount of wind could carry away. Took notes on a small tablet. "You mentioned the attackers were professional." "Yes," said. "Tight formations, disciplined fire, not militia, ex-military most likely. Their weapons were NATO issue, modified M4s suppressed." "Any identification?" "None, no insignia, no tags." "Casualties among your personnel?" "3 wounded, no fatalities." Looked up from her notes, one eyebrow raised. "You repelled a professional assault with recruits and instructors and no deaths." Met her gaze evenly. "That's correct." "And how exactly did you manage that, Major?" Paused. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. He glanced toward the far edge of the range. Was there, standing beside a stack of supply crates, her uniform freshly laundered, her hair tied neatly back. She was speaking softly with a young private, showing him how to clean a rifle barrel. Nothing remarkable, nothing dangerous. "Luck," said finally, "and good soldiers." Raines studied him. "Luck." He didn't sound convinced. "We'll want to review the footage from your range cameras." His jaw tightened. "They were destroyed in the blast, sir." "Convenient," Raines murmured. The man in sunglasses finally spoke. His voice was calm, smooth, and empty. "Was anyone unusually effective during the defense, Major?" Hesitated just a fraction too long. "Everyone performed their duties." The man tilted his head. "That's not what I asked." Glanced at her tablet. "According to your preliminary report, one of your specialists, L, was the only one to qualify expert on her weapon during the same. Is that correct?" Stomach tightened. "Yes, she improved." His gaze sharpened, dramatically. "She surprised us all," he said evenly. "Perhaps you can introduce us," the man in sunglasses said softly. Didn't answer, he just turned toward the range. "This way." Looked up as they approached. She straightened instinctively, eyes calm, expression neutral, the picture of military discipline. "Specialist," said. "This is Colonel Raines and Major, they're here from command." Nodded politely. "Sir, ma'am." Raines studied her like one might study a piece of unmarked evidence. "Specialist, I've read your file. Logistics transfer, originally stationed at Fort. 7 failed weapon qualifications prior to this one." "Yes, sir." "And today you passed." "Yes, sir." Raines glanced toward the ridge. "With distinction, it seems." She didn't reply. The man in sunglasses stepped closer. "Tell me, specialist, where did you learn to shoot?" Her eyes flickered briefly toward, then back to the man. "Basic training, sir." "That's interesting," he said, smiling faintly. "Because I've seen a lot of basic training, and I've never seen anyone shoot like that." She didn't answer. "Who taught you trigger discipline, range reading, wind compensation? You were hitting cable supports at 300 meters with iron sights." "I was lucky," she said. The man's smile widened slightly, though it never reached his eyes. "Luck doesn't compensate for crosswind." Raines sighed. "That's enough." He turned to, "We'll conduct our review and be on our way." They left soon after, but not before the man in sunglasses gave one last look, the kind of look that promised she wasn't forgotten. By noon, the helicopters were gone. The silence they left behind felt heavier than the gunfire had. Found in the shade of a maintenance shed, wiping the dust from her hands. Her face was calm, but he could tell the visit had shaken her. "They know," she said quietly. He stopped. "What makes you say that?" She looked toward the empty sky where the helicopters had vanished. The man in the glasses, he wasn't command, he was from Special Operations Division, the quiet branch. "You recognized him?" "No," she said, "but he recognized me." Leaned against the wall beside her. "If he knows, why didn't he say it?" "Because he can't, not out loud. They don't acknowledge ghosts, Major, they just reassign them." He frowned. "To where?" "Wherever they stop asking questions." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of the burned range. Looked at her, and the question he'd been holding back since dawn finally escaped. "Who were you?" She smiled faintly, almost sadly. "You don't want to know that, sir." "I think I already do." Her gaze shifted to the horizon. "Once, a long time ago, I was part of something that didn't exist. We were used, discarded, written out of the records. The things we did, no one was meant to know. No names, no medals, just results." She paused, fingers brushing over the scar on her hand. "That's what the mark was for, to remind us what we'd become." "The crescent." She nodded. "They called us kestrels, not because we flew, because we hunted alone." Felt a chill crawl down his spine. "And now you're here, failing weapons tests on purpose." "Trying to forget," she said softly, "trying to be someone else." He studied her for a long moment. "You can't outrun what you are, specialist." "No," she said, "but I can choose when to stop." The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Soldiers repaired walls, refilled sandbags, restocked ammo crates. From a distance, the base looked normal again. But the men weren't the same. They spoke softer now, watched the ridges longer, and when they passed, they nodded, not out of courtesy but respect. Maybe fear. She ignored it all. She kept working. Cleaning rifles, inspecting sights, helping rookies check their optics. Her movements were steady, efficient, but her eyes drifted often to the horizon. Watching. Waiting. Watched her too. He'd commanded hundreds of soldiers, trained elite shooters, disciplined failures into excellence. But was something entirely different. She wasn't trained. She was forged. That night, as the desert cooled, he sat alone in his quarters, writing his second report. The desk lamp flickered against the pages. He kept it brief. Command inspection completed. No anomalies noted. Unit readiness restored. Recommend continued evaluation of Specialist L for advanced field instruction. It was a lie again. Another layer of silence to bury the truth. When he signed it, he paused for a long time before adding one final line, something no one would ever see but him. "She saved us. I owe her peace." Hours later, long after the camp had gone quiet, he heard movement outside his window. Stood alone at the range, illuminated by the pale light of a waxing moon. Her rifle rested in her hands, disassembled, laid out neatly on the bench. She wasn't shooting. She wasn't training. She was just sitting. He stepped outside, slow, careful not to startle her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I don't sleep much." He joined her, standing a few paces behind. The night air was cold, the smell of oil and metal heavy around them. "You think they'll come back?" he asked. "They never stopped watching," she said quietly. "Not really." He looked at her profile, the scar glinting faintly in the moonlight. "Then let them watch." For the first time she looked at him fully, her expression softened. "You don't understand, Major. They don't watch to protect, they watch to erase." He held her gaze. "Not while I'm here." The silence stretched between them, fragile and human. Then she smiled, barely. "That's kind of you, sir, but ghosts don't need guardians." She began reassembling her weapon, hands moving with ritual precision. Each click of metal was like a heartbeat, steady and sure. Watched her in silence, realizing something profound in that moment. She wasn't haunted by what she'd done. She was haunted by the fact that she'd been too good at it. Why did they send her out again so soon? The morning light had barely washed the dust from the sky when the order came. A patrol. Routine, they called it. A perimeter sweep to verify the attacker's retreat. But there was nothing routine about the silence that followed Command's visit, or the way Major's signature appeared at the bottom of the dispatch so quickly, too quickly. Lena stood by the convoy truck, adjusting the strap on her rifle. Around her, 4 soldiers checked gear with the distracted rhythm of men who wanted to be anywhere else. They avoided her eyes, not out of disrespect, but out of something closer to superstition. No one said it out loud, but every man on that truck knew what she had done yesterday. She climbed aboard last, sitting near the back. The vehicle jolted forward, bouncing along the dirt road that led toward the hills. The sun was already high, and the heat turned the world into a wavering mirage. Corporal sat across from her, helmet tilted low, hands fidgeting with the strap of his weapon. He hadn't said a word since the attack. He was the one who had mocked her on the range. Now he could barely look at her. The engine droned, the tires grinding over gravel. No one spoke. The silence stretched too long. Finally broke it. "Ma'am," he caught himself. "Specialist, what are we even looking for out there?" "Tracks," she said simply. "Patterns, people who came and left." He nodded, though he clearly didn't understand. "You think they'll come back?" he asked. "They already did," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The words hung in the air like a storm warning. The convoy stopped near a dry creek bed about 5 miles north of the base. The land here was sharp and quiet, jagged ridges rising from the earth like broken bones. His voice crackled over the radio. "Recon only. Stay in visual range. Report anything unusual." "Copy," replied. They moved in a slow line through the rocks, the heat pressing down like a weight. Every sound, a boot scuff, a canteen rattle, felt amplified against the emptiness. Led, she didn't need a map. Her eyes moved constantly, reading the terrain the way others read language. The small things gave everything away: disturbed dust, the faint bend of a weed, where it shouldn't be. She stopped suddenly, raising a fist. The line froze. "What is it?" whispered. She crouched, touching a shallow depression in the sand. "Not ours," she said. "Tread patterns reversed, imported gear." "Could be old," offered. She shook her head. "Less than a day." Swallowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone's still out here." Her voice was low but steady. They moved forward slowly, hugging the rocks. Every nerve was alive now, every sound filtered through tension. The desert was vast and quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Reached the edge of a small ridge and signaled the team to stop. Below them, half buried under loose sand, was the wreckage of a small drone. Military issue. Camera torn out. Battery pack removed. "Recon drone," said. "Ours." She shook her head. "No serial markings, they stripped it." She picked it up carefully, brushing dust from the metal. Something about the build was off. Not insurgent-made. Too clean, too precise. Stepped closer. "You think this was theirs?" She nodded slowly. "They were watching before they hit the range." "Watching who?" She didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on the twisted frame of the drone, then on the scar at the base of her thumb. The same shape as the mark etched into the metal, a small crescent scratched near the joint of the wing. She froze. It wasn't random. It was a symbol, her symbol. Someone out there wanted her to see it. Back at base, the report was brief and unremarkable. Recovered unknown drone, origin uncertain, no further contact. Read it twice, then looked up at her. They were alone in his office, the fan overhead turning lazily. "You're not telling me everything," he said quietly. "No, sir." "Start." She placed the drone on his desk. They weren't just watching the base, they were watching me. His eyes darkened. "You're certain?" She pointed to the mark. "That symbol, it's not coincidence, it's a signature." Stared at it, the crescent was faint but unmistakable. "Yours." "Ours," she corrected. "Kestrel unit. It's how we identified equipment in the field. Every op had its ghosts. We marked what was ours so we could burn it if we had to." "So someone from that unit is alive," she finished, "or wants me to think they are." He exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Command not going to like this." "They already know," she said. "They sent that man yesterday to confirm it." Rubbed his temples. "You think the attack was to flush you out?" "I don't think," she said softly. "I know." Her tone left no room for doubt. For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the fan filled the silence. Then stood. "If they wanted to find you, they have. What happens now?" She looked up at him, eyes calm but heavy. "Now they test me." "Test you?" "To see if the ghost still breathes." That night the air was restless again. A storm was building over the horizon, flickers of lightning tracing the sky like veins. Sat outside her barracks, cleaning her rifle in silence. Every movement was precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. She wasn't just maintaining a weapon, she was steadying herself. Across the compound, watched her through the dim light spilling from his window. The storm's wind carried the smell of dust and rain, rare in this part of the world. It felt like something was shifting, and he couldn't tell if it was the weather or fate. He stepped outside, walking slowly toward her. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Every day." "Then why stay?" She slid the rifle bolt into place with a click. "Because running doesn't erase anything. It just changes the scenery." He sat down beside her, his boots crunching in the gravel. "You think whoever's behind this will come again?" She nodded. "They always do. Ghosts attract ghosts." Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating her face. The scar on her hand glinted like a small moon. "Back in your unit?" asked quietly. "What did you do when the mission was over?" She thought for a long time before answering. "We never had an over, sir. We just moved to the next target. The only end we understood was silence." Her words lingered, cold and hollow. Then the wind shifted, bringing with it a faint metallic tang smoke. She smelled it before he did. Her head snapped toward the east perimeter. "Fire?" asked, already rising. "Not fire," she said. "Cover." The alarm blared seconds later. The eastern watchtower, a thin column of steel against the storm-dark sky, erupted in flame. A second later, tracer fire laced through the night. "Contact," a voice screamed over the radio. "Multiple hostiles, East Ridge." Was already shouting orders. "Everyone up, defensive positions." The base erupted in motion, soldiers spilling from barracks, scrambling for cover. Searchlights cut through the storm, sweeping the ridges. The crack of rifles split the air again, deliberate, controlled bursts, professional. Grabbed her rifle, checked the chamber and looked at. "Same direction as yesterday," she said. He nodded grimly. "They're back." "No," she said, "they never left." She moved before he could stop her, disappearing into the storm's darkness. He shouted her name, but the wind swallowed it. On the ridge, visibility was low, wind, dust, flashes of lightning tearing the world into fragments of light and shadow. Moved low, using the terrain the way only someone born to it could. Every step was a calculation, every pause a decision. The gunfire below was chaotic, the base's defense disorganized under the sudden assault. But she wasn't thinking about the base. She was thinking about the drone, the mark, the message. She knew what this was. Not an attack, a summons. When she crested the ridge, She saw movement ahead, a cluster of figures in black, their shapes barely visible through the blowing dust. One of them turned, and even through the storm she saw the faint reflection of a crescent emblem on his shoulder. Her breath caught. They were kestrels, or what was left of them. The man raised a hand in greeting, not aiming, not threatening. She lifted her rifle halfway, caught between instinct and memory. He spoke, voice muffled through the wind. "We found you, L-12." She froze. No one had called her that name in years. "Put the rifle down," he said calmly. "We're not your enemy." "Then why attack?" she shouted back. "To get you alone." Lightning flashed, and for a moment she saw his face, older, familiar. "Ghosts don't stay buried," he said. "Not when the war starts again." Her pulse hammered. "There is no war." He smiled faintly. "There will be." And then he vanished into the storm, leaving only the echo of his words and the sound of distant thunder rolling over the ridge. What do you tell a man who thinks the war is over, when you know it never ended? The storm had passed by dawn, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and pale. The base was quiet again, too quiet, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but exhaustion. Major stood near the wreckage of the eastern watchtower, hands resting on his hips. The twisted metal still smoked faintly. His uniform was streaked with dust and ash, his throat raw from shouting orders through the night. No one had seen since the attack. She disappeared into the storm, and for 6 long hours no one knew if she was alive or gone until she walked back through the gates at sunrise. She carried her rifle slung over her shoulder, her steps steady, deliberate. There was a tear in her sleeve and a dark bruise across her jaw, but otherwise she looked untouched. The soldiers at the gate froze when they saw her. "Met her halfway. Where were you?" "On the ridge." "What did you see?" Her eyes flicked past him, toward the hills now painted gold by morning light. "Enough." He stepped closer. "Enough for what?" She hesitated. The pause was brief, but it told him everything, that there was more than she wanted to say, more than he should know. "Specialist," he said quietly, "I need the truth." She finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes, not for herself but for him. "You don't," she said softly, "not this time." The debriefing was short, clinical, empty. Enemy contact confirmed. Hostiles north, casualties minimal. Command sent no response. No questions, no congratulations, nothing. That silence was its own message, the kind recognized from years of service. When command didn't ask for details, it was because they already knew them. He watched from his office window that afternoon. She was on the range again, this time running drills with the younger soldiers. Her movements were quiet, efficient, but her eyes weren't on the targets. They were on the horizon, always on the horizon. Approached him hesitantly, clearing his throat. "Sir, can I ask something?" Turned, "Go ahead." "Is she dangerous?" Studied him. The corporal's voice was small, uncertain, like a child asking about monsters under the bed. "Everyone here is dangerous," said evenly. "That's the job." "That's not what I mean," said. "She doesn't flinch, sir, doesn't even blink when the shots start. It's like she's somewhere else." Didn't answer, because was right. She was somewhere else, trapped in a place the rest of them couldn't see. When the corporal left, stayed by the window, watching her adjust a recruit's grip on his rifle, her hand steady on his shoulder. There was patience in her now, a softness he hadn't seen before. But beneath it, he sensed the same quiet readiness, the same stillness before a storm. That evening, he found her alone by the motor pool again, sitting on the hood of a transport truck, her rifle across her knees. The air smelled of fuel and rain-soaked dust. He stopped a few feet away. "You're going to have to tell me what happened out there." Her head turned slightly. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." She exhaled slowly. They were waiting, watching, and they weren't insurgents. Who then? People I used to know. The words landed heavy between them. Crossed his arms. You're saying your old unit attacked us. She shook her head. Not all of them, what's left of them. Kestrels didn't retire, Major. We were dismantled, scattered. Some disappeared, some didn't. Then why now? He asked. She looked up at the fatting sky, her voice distant. Because someone woke the program back up. Frowned, that's impossible. It was shut down. On paper, she interrupted. Everything gets shut down on paper, but you can't decommission people, sir. You can only lose track of them. Felt a chill crawl through him, and they came for you. They came to see if I still remembered, she said softly, if the ghost still breathed. And do you? Her eyes found his. I remember everything. The silence that followed was heavier than any confession. Later that night, the base was quiet except for the hum of generators and the faint metallic ticking of cooling engines. Sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing cursor on his computer screen. The empty incident report waited for words he didn't know how to write. He'd been a soldier long enough to recognize when the battlefield shifted, when the enemy stopped being the one in front of you and started being the one above you. He typed 2 lines, then deleted them, typed again, deleted again. Every word felt like a betrayal of her, of his oath, of something deeper he couldn't name. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. Enter. Stepped inside. No salute, no preamble, just quiet, controlled presence. I need to leave the base, she said. He looked up sharply. That's not happening. They'll come again, she said. Not for you, for me, and next time they won't test, they'll extract. Then we'll be ready. You can't fight what you can't see, she said. You'll lose people, good ones. Running isn't an answer. It's not running, she said. It's redirecting. He stood, moving around the desk until he was facing her. You think disappearing will fix this? They'll just keep coming. You can't erase a legend. You made them remember you. She smiled faintly. I didn't, you did, when you let me shoot that last magazine. He froze. You didn't know, she said gently. But someone did. Someone watching the qualification feed saw it, and they recognized the pattern. His pulse quickened. What pattern? The shot sequence, she said. Center head knee cable. It's the same pattern I used on the last mission before the Kestrels were buried. It's how they found me. He stared at her. You're telling me they identified you by your shooting? She nodded. They don't need names, Major, just signatures. The weight of it hit him slowly like a tide. His range cameras, the footage command had requested, the silence that followed, the sudden inspection. They hadn't come to investigate. They'd come to confirm. Sat heavily at his desk, rubbing his eyes. God damn it. Stepped closer. It's not your fault. I gave them the footage, he said, voice low. I handed them your ghost. She reached out, touching his shoulder lightly. You gave me a chance to stop pretending. That's not nothing. He looked up at her, searching her expression for anger, resentment, anything. There was none, only quiet resolve. What will you do? He asked. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Find out who's waking the dead. Hours later, he found her gone. No note, no sign of departure, only her bunk neatly made and the faint smell of gun oil lingering in the air. Stood in the empty barracks, his chest heavy with something that felt dangerously close to loss. He'd seen soldiers leave before, transfers, desertions, deaths, but this felt different. This felt like watching a storm walk out of a bottle. By sunrise, command had already sent new orders, reinforcements en route, standard investigation procedure. He knew what that meant, a cleanup team, a cover story. He read the memo twice, then tore it in half. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly toward the horizon, shimmering in the morning light. Somewhere out there, she was already moving, silent, efficient, impossible to trace. Approached cautiously, Sir, did specialist transfer out? Looked at him, something like that. She's not coming back, is she? He didn't answer. Nodded slowly, eyes downcast. Guess she wasn't meant to stay, huh? Turned his gaze back to the horizon. Some people aren't meant to stay anywhere, he said quietly. They're meant to keep the world honest, whether it wants them to or not. He walked back toward his office, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, he sat at his desk and opened a fresh document. No headings, no titles, just a blank page. He began to write, not a report this time, but a record, something no one else would ever read. She wasn't a ghost. She was the memory of one, the part of war that doesn't end when the shooting stops, the kind that lingers in the quiet, waiting to be remembered again. He stopped there, staring at the words until they blurred. Then he closed the file and turned off the screen. Outside, the sun rose higher, burning away the cool of dawn. The air shimmered again, just like it had that first day on the range. And somewhere out there, beyond the line of sight, the woman who had failed every test was walking back into the shadows, toward the people who had tried to erase her, toward the ghosts who had called her name in the storm. How do you disappear when the people looking for you built the art of vanishing? For 3 days, the world forgot her name. No one at the outpost heard her boots on the gravel. No one saw her on the cameras. There was no transfer order, no trail. She simply stepped out of her uniform and back into legend. Specialist Lena, the woman who couldn't qualify, was gone. But somewhere beyond the perimeter fences, where the desert cracked into canyons and the wind carried secrets instead of sand, the Kestrel walked again. Her first night alone was spent in the ruins of an old comm station, half collapsed and buried under the desert. The air inside smelled of dust, rust, and old electricity. She moved with quiet familiarity, stripping her rifle, laying out her tools on a faded map that still clung to the wall. Each motion felt like remembering a language she swore she'd never speak again. She had traded her uniform for civilian fatigues, cut her hair short, wrapped it under a scarf. Her dog tags were gone, buried beneath the sand outside the base, a small grave for a name that had never really belonged to her. When the wind died, the silence was total. It wasn't peaceful, it was surgical. She reached into her pack and pulled out the drone she'd recovered from the ridge, the one marked with the crescent. Carefully, she cracked it open again, this time with purpose. Inside, hidden beneath the housing, she found it, a thin sliver of metal the size of a coin, an encrypted data wafer. No markings, no serial, just a single etched letter on its face, K. Her pulse steadied. Whoever sent that drone wasn't guessing, they were signaling. She connected the wafer to her field tablet, bypassing the military encryption she hadn't used in years. The screen flickered to life with static, then text. A single line. L12 active protocol reauthorized. Origin, Black Site Vega. The message looped once, then dissolved. Vega. The name hit like a memory she'd buried alive. Vega was where the Kestrel program had ended, or where they'd claimed it had. The place where the files were wiped, the operators scattered, and the silence began. She sat back, her breath slow and controlled. So this wasn't random, it wasn't revenge, it was a resurrection. Someone somewhere had reopened the cage. Far to the south, in a military briefing room built of steel and paranoia, Major stood before 3 senior officers and 1 man in civilian clothes. The insignia on their uniforms said command. The look in their eyes said something colder. Colonel Rains began the interrogation. She deserted your post 3 nights ago. Yes, sir. And you didn't alert anyone. His jaw tightened. By the time I realized she was gone, she was already off-grid. The man in civilian clothes leaned forward. You trained her, Major. No, she didn't need training. Then you knew what she was. Met his gaze evenly. I knew what she used to be. The man smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. Used to be is a convenient phrase. The Kestrel program didn't end, Major. It just went quiet. His chest went cold. Then you knew she was here. We knew someone was, the man said. Her file was redacted beyond clearance. Even command couldn't confirm until you sent that footage. His hands clenched behind his back. Raines spoke next. You're lucky this isn't a tribunal, is an asset, a valuable one. But if she falls into the wrong hands, she's also a weapon, and right now she's loaded. His voice dropped. Then send someone who isn't trying to kill her. The civilian gave him a long, measured look. We already did. 200 miles away, the ruins of Black Site Vega rose from the desert like the bones of a forgotten animal. Half-buried concrete, rusted fences, a single comms tower collapsed against the horizon. Moved through it like a ghost through her own grave. Every corridor echoed with memories, the clang of boots, the hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of oil and sweat. She could still hear the voices if she let herself. Eyes up, Kestrel, one shot, one breath. The site was officially decommissioned, but she knew better. No one ever truly abandoned places like this. They just changed the locks. She followed the old service tunnels down to the lower levels, where the walls still bore the faded designations of past lives. L12, L14, L03. Each number a ghost. She reached what had once been the operations room. A cracked terminal blinked faintly in the dark, power still running from some buried generator. She connected her tablet, watching as encrypted strings filled the screen. She wasn't looking for data. She was looking for patterns. And there it was. Recent access logs. User L01. Location unknown. Command access granted. L01. The first of them, the prototype. He'd been gone for years, or so she thought. Her throat tightened. If L01 was alive, then the Kestrels weren't just being revived. They were being rebuilt. The sound came softly at first, the faint click of boots on metal. She froze. She wasn't alone. She killed the terminal screen and dropped behind a support pillar. Voices echoed down the corridor, two men, speaking low, professional tones. Sector 2 clear, no movement. Copy, command wants confirmation she's here. The first man exhaled. If she is, we won't need confirmation, we'll know. Their steps grew louder. His hand hovered over the trigger. She could take them quick, silent, but killing them would send the wrong signal. Instead, she slipped into the maintenance shaft, sliding down the ladder into darkness. Her boots hit the dirt quietly. She didn't look back. If they were here, then command was too, which meant she was already being hunted by the one man who tried to save her. By the second night, she'd reached the edge of an abandoned fuel depot. Wind howled through the empty tanks, the sound hollow and low. She set up camp inside one of them, a ring of cold steel her only shelter. Sleep didn't come, it never did. She sat with her back against the wall, the data wafer in her hand, staring at it like it might start talking. L01. He'd been the best of them, calm, brilliant, lethal in a way that didn't make sense to normal soldiers. He wasn't supposed to break, but he had. He'd vanished after Vega burned. Some said he'd defected, others said he'd been erased. And now his signature was back in the system. She turned the wafer over in her hand. On the back, etched into the metal, was another mark she hadn't seen before, a small phrase barely visible in the low light. Come home. Her jaw clenched. Home. That word didn't belong to people like her. At dawn, she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle, low, heavy tires crunching gravel. She crouched near the tank's edge, rifle raised. It wasn't a military transport. It was an old civilian truck, paint stripped, engine coughing through the sand. When it stopped, a single man stepped out, worn jacket, dusty boots, and a face she hadn't expected to see again. "Major," she said quietly, raised his hand slightly. "You're a hard woman to find, specialist." She lowered the rifle, but not the suspicion. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." "How did you?" He nodded toward the horizon. "You didn't cover your tracks as well as you think. You left that drone core half exposed. I followed it here." She frowned. "Then they'll follow you." "They already are." The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of distant rotors. He took a step closer. "You found something, didn't you?" She hesitated, then handed him the wafer. "Someone's reactivated Vega. L01's alive." Turned the wafer over in his hand. "This says come home." "I'm not sure it's an invitation," she said. He looked at her, and in that moment he saw what she was really fighting, not an enemy but inevitability. "They're pulling you back in," he said quietly. She nodded once. "And if I don't go willingly, they'll take me." "What if we find him first?" Her eyes met his. "We." "You didn't think I came out here to arrest you, did you?" She studied him, the exhaustion in his face, the quiet conviction. "You'll lose everything if command finds out." "I already did," he said, "the moment I let you shoot that rifle." The sound of rotors grew louder now, closer, heavier. She looked toward the horizon. 3 black helicopters cutting through the dawn, no insignias. "They found us," she said. Checked his sidearm. "Then we move." "Where?" He smiled grimly. "Wherever they don't want us to." They moved together toward the truck, the dust swirling around their boots as the first chopper broke through the cloud line. The hunt had shifted. She wasn't the only ghost anymore. When does running become returning? The desert stretched wide and endless before them, a burning sea of sand and silence. The old truck bucked over cracked earth, its suspension groaning with every dip. The radio was dead. The compass spun. Only the sky seemed to move, slow, indifferent, eternal. Drove, sat beside her, scanning the horizon through the scope of his rifle, the faint hum of helicopters fatting somewhere behind them. The road ahead was a mirage of heat. "How far?" he asked. 80 miles, give or take," she said. "North by northwest." "What's there?" She hesitated. "A place they never erased, one of Vega's satellite stations." Exhaled slowly. "You're sure?" "I helped build it." The wind screamed through the cracked window. Dust stung their faces. Neither spoke for a while. He kept glancing at her, the way her eyes never stopped moving, the stillness in her hands. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. Constant, precise, like her body had forgotten how to be off-duty. He finally asked the question he'd been holding since the ridge. "L01, who was he to you?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "The one who taught me how to aim without seeing." "That's not an answer." "No," she said quietly, "it is." By late afternoon, they reached the canyon edge, a jagged wound in the earth that stretched for miles. At its center, half buried under rock and shadow, was a complex of steel and concrete, the Vega relay. From above it looked dead, but knew better. "Generators are running," she said, scanning through her binoculars. "Low output, minimal heat signature. They're trying to look abandoned." Crouched beside her, and failing. She nodded. "They're here." He adjusted his scope. "How many?" She took a long, measured breath. "At least a dozen, maybe more underground." Lowered his rifle. "We can't take that many." "I can," she said simply. He looked at her. "Not alone." Her eyes softened slightly. "You still don't understand what you're standing in, Major. This isn't a firefight. It's an exhumation." "Then help me understand," he said. She looked down into the canyon, her expression unreadable. Vega wasn't just a training site. It was a proving ground. They weren't teaching us how to shoot. They were testing what happened when they took everything else away: fear, hesitation, conscience. And you passed. I survived, she corrected. There's a difference. Felt the words settle like dust. And him, L01. She stared at the facility, her voice almost a whisper. He didn't survive, he became it. They waited until dusk. The last light faded into deep rust and purple as shadows pooled in the canyon below. The sound of generators hummed faintly through the wind. Checked her rifle one last time, chambering a round with slow precision. Grabbed her arm. If this goes bad. It will, she interrupted, but not for us. She slipped down the slope, moving like part of the terrain, silent and deliberate. Followed, less graceful but determined. The air grew cooler, heavier. At the canyon floor, they found an old service entrance, half sealed with rusted metal. She had opened with the butt of her rifle, and they slipped inside. The corridor beyond smelled of oil and decay. Emergency lights pulsed faintly, bathing everything in dull red. Their footsteps echoed, swallowed by distance. Whispered, "Why keep the power running?" "To feed the machines that forget," she said. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened. Old terminals blinked weakly to life as they passed, like eyes recognizing a face they thought was dead. And then at the end of the hall they found it, a door marked with peeling white paint. L01, command chamber. Froze. Raised his rifle. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she whispered. She pressed her palm against the scanner. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a soft chime. The door slid open. Inside, the room was dim. Rows of monitors lined the walls, their screens flickering with static and partial feeds, satellite imagery, base schematics, lists of call signs. The air smelled of ozone and burned plastic. And in the center, sitting before a console lit by the pale glow of data, was a man. He didn't turn when they entered. "Hello, L12, he said. His voice was calm, familiar, too familiar. His breath caught. "It's really you." He stood slowly, turning toward them. His hair was silver now, his face lined but sharp, his eyes cold and knowing. "Did you think I'd die that easily?" he said. Stepped forward, weapon raised, hands where I can see them. L01 smiled faintly. "Still giving orders, Major. That's brave, considering you're already 10 minutes behind the kill window." "Kill window?" echoed. "Step between them. Don't." L01 looked at her, studying her face as if reacquainting himself with an old habit. "You came back." "You left me," she said quietly. He nodded once. Someone had to survive to rebuild. "Rebuild what?" she demanded. "The order," he said simply. "The Kestrels were never meant to die, Lena. We were meant to outlast politics. Command killed the name, not the purpose. Someone had to keep the blade sharp." Spoke again, voice steady. "And the attacks on the base, the men you sent to kill her." "They weren't meant to kill her," said. "They were meant to remind her who she is. You don't wake a ghost with comfort." His eyes hardened. "You sent them to slaughter unarmed recruits." "Collateral noise," he said. "Every legend needs ignition." Stepped closer. "You're insane." L01 smiled. "No, Major, I'm necessary. Do you know what command does now? They outsource conscience. They breed hesitation. But we," he gestured between himself and "we were the last generation that didn't ask permission." Raised her rifle slowly, her breath trembling but controlled. "You're not talking about duty. You're talking about control." He met her gaze. "Control is all duty ever was." The air went still. Could see it, the quiet war inside her eyes. The soldier and the ghost tearing at each other. L01 spread his arms slightly. "You know I'm right. They'll never stop using you, Lena. The only choice you have is who gets to pull the trigger." Her hands tightened on the rifle. "You taught me how to shoot without seeing," she said softly. "Do you remember what you told me?" He tilted his head. "What?" "That the hardest targets are the ones that look like mirrors." She fired once. The shot was clean, surgical, a small hole through his chest, just below the clavicle. He staggered back, eyes wide with something almost like pride. "Well done," he whispered, before collapsing against the console. The monitors flickered wildly, data scrolling across them in a blur before fading to black. Lowered her weapon slowly. Her breath was shallow, her shoulders shaking. Approached cautiously, checking the man's pulse. Nothing. "You didn't have to." "I did," she said. He looked around the room. "What now?" She stared at the dead screens. "Now it starts over." Frowned. "What do you mean?" She walked to the console, typing rapidly. If L01 was alive, he wasn't alone. His system's been syncing with remote nodes, other black sites. If I don't shut it down, the Kestrel network goes live again. "How much time?" "Minutes." He moved beside her, eyes scanning the screen. "Can you do it?" She gave a faint, humorless smile. "They built the system to think like me. That's their mistake." The monitors flickered, flashing strings of code, warnings, access denials. Her fingers flew, bypassing old locks like muscle memory. Finally, one word appeared on every screen: terminate. She pressed enter. The hum of the facility deepened, then died. Lights dimmed. The sound of spinning drives slowed to stillness. Exhaled. "It's done." Nodded, staring at the dark screens. "No, it's sleeping." They stood in the silence, the air heavy with dust and the faint smell of gunpowder. Finally, she turned to him. "We need to leave. Command will trace the power loss." He hesitated, glancing at the body. "What about him?" She looked down at L01's still form. "He trained me to leave no trace." She slung her rifle over her shoulder and walked toward the door. Followed. "Where do we go?" She didn't look back. "Somewhere quieter for now." As they climbed back up into the night, the first stars began to burn through the haze. The wind howled through the canyon, cold, lonely, endless. Behind them, deep within the buried halls of Vega, a small red light blinked once. And somewhere far beyond the desert, another console flickered to life, a single prompt on a black screen. User L07 online. What happens when the ghosts you silence start asking for mercy? The desert had changed by dawn. The storm had stripped the air clean, leaving the horizon stretched bare and endless. The old truck crawled across the sand, its engine coughing in protest. Inside, neither of them spoke. Watched her hands on the steering wheel, steady, calloused, streaked faintly with blood. He'd seen those hands hold a rifle, dismantle a drone, bury a past. But now they just held silence. "Vega's gone," he said quietly. She nodded. "One sight." He turned to her. "There are more." "There always are." The wind rushed through the open window. A loose scrap of paper fluttered from the dash, the old coordinates map she'd drawn the night before. 5 red dots, scattered like wounds across the desert. "How many were there?" he asked. 7, she said. 2 still active, maybe 3 if they moved the hardware offshore. Leaned back, the seat creaking beneath him. "So this never ends." She didn't answer. The look in her eyes said enough. By midday, they stopped at an abandoned fuel outpost near the border, cracked concrete, bullet holes in the glass, an old flagpole bending in the wind. Parked the truck under a rusted canopy, shut off the engine, and sat for a long moment before stepping out. Followed. "You think command will come after us?" She smiled faintly. "They already have." He looked around the empty station. "Then why here?" "Because they won't look," she said, walking toward the small convenience store. "No signal, no records, no reason to exist. Perfect for ghosts." The inside smelled of old oil and dust. Sunlight slanted through holes in the roof, catching the dust motes in slow motion. She found a counter, brushed it clean with her sleeve, and laid out her gear: rifle, tablet, drone core, the wafer that started it all. Watched her work. Every movement was measured, practiced. But there was something different now. not the detached precision of a soldier, the weariness of a survivor. "You're not planning to hide here," he said. She didn't look up. "No." "Then what?" She stopped, hands resting on the table. "I'm going to give them what they wanted." Frowned. "You can't mean." "I'll make the kestrels real again," she said. "On my terms, not theirs." "Lena, that's suicide." She met his eyes, so was staying quiet. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You don't owe them redemption." She looked down at the scar on her hand, the one that started all of this. "I'm not redeeming them," she said softly. "I'm burying them." They spent the night building a signal. Patched the solar cells, rewired the radio antenna, and rerouted a power line from the truck's battery. Coded the uplink, a ghost frequency once used by the kestrels for black site communication. When the system blinked green, she sat back, staring at the soft glow on the screen. Leaned against the wall. "If you send this, command will trace it in minutes." "I'm counting on it," she said. "What's the message?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "The truth." She typed slowly, deliberately, each word deliberate as a round chambered. "This is L12. Vega is silent. L01 is dead. Termination code broadcast. If you're listening, you are the echo, not the origin. End it." She transmitted the message, eyes unblinking. The signal burst into the ether, crossing frequencies like a spark through dry brush. Then silence. The hum of the generator faded, and the only sound left was the wind outside, soft, restless. She stood. "It's done." Exhaled. "Now we run." "No," she said, "now we wait." They didn't have to wait long. By dawn, a shadow moved across the horizon, 3 vehicles, unmarked, cutting through the desert dust like blades. Loaded his rifle. "Command's cleanup crew." "Not command," she said, peering through her scope. "Kestrels." He looked at her sharply. "You said they were gone." "I said they were scattered," she said. "Looks like someone called them home." "How many?" "5," she whispered, "and they know how I think." He crouched beside her. "Then we change the pattern." She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You finally understand." The attack came fast, surgical, coordinated, almost beautiful in its brutality. A sniper's round cracked the air, missing his shoulder by inches. Dust exploded around them. 2 shapes moved through the far ridge, efficient, synchronized. Rolled to cover, returning fire with a short burst. The echo danced through the canyon walls. She wasn't fighting for survival now. She was fighting to end an echo. Moved to flank them, heart hammering, lungs burning. He'd been in firefights before, but this felt different. Not war, exorcism. 2 of the attackers closed in, their movements hauntingly familiar. Recognized their steps, their rhythm, the way they breathed before firing. "Kestrels." She took them down one by one, clean and silent. Her shots precise but reluctant, each kill a confession. When it was over, 3 bodies lay in the dust. The last 2 retreated, fading into the horizon like they'd never existed. Approached slowly, his face streaked with sweat and disbelief. "You all right?" She lowered her rifle. "No." He looked around at the carnage. "That's all of them." "Just the ones who wanted to be found," she said. The wind shifted, and with it, something unseen passed between them. The kind of quiet that feels like the end of a story you never wanted to tell. By late afternoon, the sun was low. The outpost was silent again, save for the soft hum of cooling metal. Sat on the hood of the truck, staring at the horizon. Stood nearby, washing her hands in a metal basin, the water turning red, then clear. "You could come back," he said finally. "We could tell command the truth." She shook her head. "They don't want the truth, they want closure." He stood, walked closer. "So what now?" "I disappear again." He frowned. "You can't keep running." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since the ridge there was warmth in her eyes. I'm not running, Major. I'm making sure no one else has to. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. They'll still come. Then I'll be ready, she said. He studied her, memorizing the quiet strength in her posture, the steadiness in her gaze. There was something almost sacred about it, the dignity of a soldier who'd stopped fighting for recognition and started fighting for peace. You're not the person they made you, he said softly. She smiled faintly. No, but I'm the one they couldn't kill. The sun dipped behind the dunes, painting her face in gold and shadow. He took a slow breath. If they ever ask me where you went, tell them you never saw me, she said. And if they don't believe me, then make them afraid to ask again. They stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken promise. Then she turned, slinging her rifle, and started walking toward the horizon. No goodbye, no salute, just the sound of boots in the dust. Weeks later, sat alone in his quarters back at base. Command had closed the investigation. Incident at Vega contained. Assets terminated. Officially, Specialist Lena never existed. He opened the classified file one last time, the one marked Kestrel Program, Final Assessment, and scrolled to the bottom. There, buried beneath layers of redacted text, was a note he hadn't seen before. Subject L12, status unknown, presumed active. He closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the scar on his hand, the one she'd stitched for him after the ridge. A faint, crooked line, a reminder that some wounds don't need healing to mean something. He whispered to the empty room, "Wherever you are, don't come back." Outside, a convoy rumbled past the base gates, kicking up dust. One of the drivers looked out, a woman, face half hidden by a scarf, eyes calm, unreadable. For a moment their gazes met, then she was gone. That night the base lights flickered once. The comms system rebooted, then stabilized. In the control tower, an operator noticed a brief pulse on a dead frequency, one that hadn't been active in years. A single transmission, no origin, no encryption, just 3 words. Echo terminated, silence. Then nothing. No trace, no signature, just the quiet hum of a system that had forgotten how to remember. And in the far distance, where the desert meets the horizon, a figure walked beneath the rising dawn, one hand, the other steady. She carried no flag, no orders, no name. Only purpose. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.